Welcome to the Stoa. This is the digital campfire where we see what emerges at the knife's edge. I'm really excited to introduce today Barry Oshry. He's been an influence of my own thinking in the systems world and human systems. And I'm so excited that he accepted my invitation to join us here. My name is Naryan, and I've been attending Stoa events since Peter started this thing off. Oh yeah, Alex is holding up the book. Yeah, and it's great to see all of these names coming in. I actually see the confluence of 4 or 5 of the different communities that I partake in. And I think that's one of the things that's so magical about the Stoa for me, is all of these different communities coming to the same place to have a discussion and to ask some questions and, share some wisdom. So a little bit about Barry, just in introduction. Many years ago, he started the Power and Systems Labs, an experiential type of learning environment that greatly inspired some of the work that I've been doing. He's an author of a whole bunch of different books, like Seeing Systems, and one about context as well. And he's also a playwright. And I think if you've read his books, you'll notice the unique way that he does with writing or sharing ideas through dialogues. So I've found this very inspiring personally, and I can't wait to get into discussion. So the way things usually work here at the Stoa is I'll ask the first couple of questions, get into dialogue with Barry. And if you have questions that pop up, feel free to enter those into the chats. And once we're ready to start taking questions, I'll just start calling on people to read their questions. If you don't want to read your question out loud, feel free to just send it to me privately and say, can you read this one for me? I'm happy to do that as well. And also this recording, this conversation is being recorded and will probably go on YouTube and a podcast. Yeah, I think that's it. So Barry, it's so good to see you. Finally, I sent you a birthday note at your 89th birthday, I think, and that was how we first got in touch.
I think
Yeah, I'm thinking as we were waiting for folks to arrive, you mentioned that the way that you'd sort of come to a lot of this work is through experience and observation initially, and then you sort of worked your way towards theory. I wonder if you could give us just a sense of what your journeys looked like.
Okay, well, that'll be one particular journey, probably a significant one, and it helps to sort of clarify something from the beginning, because sometimes if this is about people interested in systems and human systems, and I think people will be surprised to know how little I know about other people's theories. And so somebody will ask me, well, how does this connect with so and so and so and so and so and so? And that's when my mouth just, drops. I say, sorry to say, I really don't know a lot about that. And so to talk about that, the development, where I think I ended in tying up as much of the work as I could. I felt like I have developed really a unique human systems theory, a theory about human systems that is not mechanical systems, human systems, groups, organizations, communities, all sorts of. And in a sense, what I mean by a theory is, and I go back to how theories are generally described as not simply a good idea. So a lot of people say, here's my theory of such and such, and it may not be bad, it's a good set of ideas, but it's not a theory in the sense that it describes, it predicts, it offers better solutions to existing frameworks and things of that order. And the human systems theory that we call the organic systems framework does all of that. It meets the criteria. It doesn't mean it solves everything, but it does. It's open to further development around it. Well, and I think when I look back to say that if that's true, that I think I'm sort of a number one, I would say a class one theorist. When I began, I was really a totally atheoretical person. I had really no interest in theory at all. I would fall asleep reading theoretical material. And what I really was charged up about was experiential work. That is, I just loved the notion of creating experiences for people that would really grab them and get them thinking and feeling in new ways. But that eventually what happened, and the Power Lab, we'll probably get to that, I suppose. The Power Lab was a major feature in that. And in the early stages of developing theory, it was really very awkward. I knew there were things I was seeing, but I couldn't describe them very, very well. And they weren't that clear. They weren't very clear to me. And then that clarity evolved over time. But somewhere along the way, I made the commitment that the Power Lab was such a rich opportunity for me, because here we had what was for me a laboratory experience. For participants, it wasn't a laboratory experience. They were getting into this and it was about their personal learning. But for me, for the most part, I created a role for myself, which we called an anthropologist. And then just for those of you who don't know what the Power Lab is, just a little bit of an outline of it, all right? The basic is what we did is we would create a total immersion experience, a 3-class total immersion experience. And at one end, you had the elite, and the elite owned all of the resources of the society. They owned the housing, they owned the food, they owned the only funds that bought anything in the society. They owned the judicial system. The legal head of this, the Chief Justice, was a member of the elite. They owned the total workforce. So when you came into that society at the other end, if you came in as an immigrant, you gave up all of your belongings, all of your money, your car keys, your phones, your electronics, and all of that. You could, if you had medicine, you could keep medicine with you. You had a change of clothing, that was it. And that's how you entered this society. And you entered this society, you had no place to sleep, no food to eat. The only way you got any of those is you had to sign up for labor and earn as much money as you can, and hopefully out of that you could be able to buy toothbrush, toothpaste, maybe buy a meal for yourself, rent a room or something of that order. So that is where that was. And in the middle, you had the middles, we call them the managers, and they enjoyed a slightly higher quality of life than the immigrants, so long as they carried out the business of the elite to the satisfaction of the elite. But they were always vulnerable. If they didn't do what the mission of the elite was, they were vulnerable to losing whatever they had. So that was a setup that was created. We may talk later on about where that came from, but I want to stay with this subject. So the question was, I felt very top about these things. I knew I was creating these, in some sense, very intense and difficult experiences with people. None of these positions are easy. If you think being an elite was easy, you're wrong, because being elite, it's one thing if you live way out in the exurbs and you're the elite and you have all those resources, but you live in the same dining room as these folks across the way. And while you're getting your nice first-class meal, they're getting whatever they're able to afford, which wouldn't be much. And so there were no easy places to be. So at the outset of this, being very top, I always felt, this is going to end at some point, and these people are going to be looking to me to make some sense out of this experience that they had. And I always carried that. And it seems silly now, because so much we say, look, when you're top, don't suck up responsibility to yourself and away from others. Didn't matter. That came later. At that point, I was totally unaware of the power of topness. And some of you may feel that in anything. You run a class, you're a consultant, you know about that experience of feeling, hey, I have to be of some value. Well, think of what that means when you're taking people away and immersing them in this intense experience for that time. So I would spend a lot of time sort of scribbling notes, little insights that I'm getting, little insights of such and such, you know. And I had like a notebook of those. And then, but when it came to the end, my insights didn't do anything for anybody. And after a while, I said, I can't do that. I have to do something else. And what I have to do is simply observe what's going on as best I can. That's all I can do. And that process of saying all I was going to know about systems was what I learned by observing these total systems one after the other, year after year after year, 2 a year, 3, and on we go. And eventually out of those observations, you began to see patterns emerging. Patterns that developed in that top world, the kinds of tensions tops got into with one another, patterns that developed in that middle world, and patterns that developed in that bottom world. It was almost as if I was given 3 different societies to look at every time. There's no, you can talk about what the whole, we used to call it the Society of New Hope, which is, what's the word for that? But anyhow, but essentially the gift was that these were in some sense distinct but overlapping worlds. To have that opportunity, what's unique about that top world, middle world, and bottom world? So over time, eventually that developed. I remember in one early program in California, and I was talking just as I am to you, to my co-trainer at the time. His name was Joe Luft. Some of you may know the Joe Harry window, if you ever study that along the way. Joe was the Joe of Joe Harry window. And Harry Ingham was the Harry of that. Well, anyways, and when I talked about this, Joe said, so what is it? What you're trying to do is pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, which often is thought of as not a very intelligent thing to do, but it's true. So as a result of that, I in that commitment to say that whatever was going to emerge out of this was going to be empirical. Now, not only based on my observations as an anthropologist, who was the deal we made with people is that you could count on us never to pass information from one part of the system to the other. But as in payment for that provision, we have to have access to everything. So there's no such thing as a private meeting where you're going to exclude me. Or after a while, we became a team of anthropologists, and that provision held. So can you imagine this gift? Sometimes I think, like, if a person who was smarter than me and more intelligent than me was in that same position, he would have created even much more than I've been able to create. To be able to have, think about the systems that you're in. And if you had access to, there was no secrets from you, to all parts of that system, all the levels, all the differences in there, and hear how what's going on in one place is so far off from what's going on in someplace else. And the understanding that people have here is so off the wall from what's actually happening over here. Anyways, eventually that got to the organic systems framework, the theory that underlies power in systems and underlies everything else. I finally got to the place this year where I wrote What Lies Beneath, which was really the only article in all my years I ever wrote that was published in a legitimate journal. And I said, when I did that, I'm done. That's as far as Oshry goes. And if other people pick this up and are able to elaborate, take it to new levels, that would be wonderful. So that's that. You can respond to that, or else we move to something else.
That's it. It's beautiful, and it's cool to hear you describing those Power Labs experiments, like what it was like for you. I'm finding it myself really curious about the anthropological lens that you're talking about, and I'm wondering, was this, so you were able to find yourself in the role of anthropologist in these experiments. I'm wondering if that's the kind of thing that participants also got a taste of, or how do you think that participants were able to use their experience within those labs to take it outside of the labs and
Right,
experience the world?
right. Oh, by the way, I'm going to get to that one. I just want to add one more item. I know this is what happens with a 90-year-old mind. You forgot something. And it was that I wasn't always, sometimes when the labs were so small, I actually joined the lab in some position, which was even more vulnerable. So I would be a middle in a lab. Having written about middleness, I should know what to do in here, okay? And so part of the learning was those that. But okay, let me get to your question. So the way to your question starts with failure. Now, there was a particular lab that I thought was failure. What I meant by failure was, this is an early one, but still, you gotta face it. What I meant by failure is I didn't think people had the experience. I didn't think it rattled them. I didn't think it got to them. And it got so we even said to them, listen, you can come back next time for free, and let's do this again. And only one person actually did take us up on that. But what did failure do? Failure said, this is not only a learning thing, this is also business. I could not live with failures, both spiritually as well as economically. I had to make the lab as much as possible a foolproof experience. So, and it's going to get to your question, Naryan, right? In that, how could I do that? Now I know that in one sense, just setting up that structure and understand in that structure, people just entered. Nobody was ever told how to behave. You're thrown into that top place. You know what the condition is there. Survive, do whatever you can do. Same with the bottom, same with the middle. So it's not role playing. That's the point. It's like, that's what makes it such a nice laboratory experience. Nobody's told how to be any of these things. You just do what you do, and then we see what happens. Okay, so what we did was added a couple of dimensions to the experience. One is, some of you already know about times out of time from the organization workshop. Well, we sort of built that into the lab, that once a day, there was a period in which roles were gone, people were brought together, but not like in the organization workshop. When people are brought together, they're encouraged to share their experiences with one another. That's not the case here, because we don't want the time out of time to be a conciliatory experience, merely one that opens up more thinking about it. So what we did is we had the people sitting in different parts of the room, the immigrants over here, the middles here, the elite over there. And we put in some inputs about power and systems, some ways for them to look at their experience. So this is the first opportunity giving, where you have an opportunity to rise above the experience and take a look at it from these frameworks. So that was one item. But a second thing we put in was we created a team of coaches. We created two teams, a team of coaches and a team of anthropologists. Coaches, this is the kind of coach you'd like to have. Coaches would talk to you before the lab to find out, where were you? What are you learning? What's life like for you? What are your learning interests here? And also, you knew that you were coming into either the elite, middle, or immigrant place. You didn't know what that meant, but that was it. And so, anyways, that coach was with you before the lab, like sitting on your shoulder during the lab, doing little things like, you said you wanted to develop your power, but I happen to notice that right now you seem to be sitting on your power. You don't seem to be, risking it, that kind of thing. And so they were there. So that was one thing, that the coach was somebody who was really going to be a force for helping you get into the experience and get the experience you needed to have. Okay, so there was that. So there's that. That's a very big a difference. And that coach was even with you a little bit after the lab to check in and see what's happening, what the life was like. But then the anthropologist was a new one. It was like saying, okay, I was the only one. Now, what if we had a team of anthropologists? That way we could really cover the whole experience. Anthropologist was also a very difficult role. You'd be the first ones up in the morning and the last ones, whatever's going on at night, somebody is covering that. And somebody's up, there's a meeting going to be with the immigrants 6:30 in the morning, somebody's got to be there. And so you had this team, and then do a whole processes of how they share information across and all of that. Well, each anthropologist would you'd have these loose leaf notebooks, whatever it is, they would have 50 to 100 pages of notes over just a 3 or 4 day period. I mean, just descriptions of where is this happening, what's the conversation, no analysis, pure description, this is what happened, this was on and on and on. And then they had like a day and a half. Once the societal experience ended, there was a period in which we did other things. And during that period of time, the anthropologists were busy preparing sessions they were going to have on the last day of the workshop to do 2 things. One is to elevate the story of that society that nobody in it had ever possibly known. What was life? What was the elite story? What was the issues that they were wrestling with internally? What was it? What was the immigrant story? What was it? What was the manager story? And each of those stories was its own elaborate and complex and very rich tale. But it was an amazing, if you're paying attention, it is an amazing experience to know what you thought was going on and to see what was really going on throughout this system. Now, so that was another part of it. It wasn't like they had, so Ryan, your question was, did they ever have that experience? The only way they could have that experience here, the way we set it up, was through the eyes of the anthropologist. And then there would be a lot of dialogue that would go on about, reactions to it and other things about it. So given all of that, the lab became a very powerful and surefire experience for people. But that's the value of failure. And if you really let it in and say, okay, yeah, face it, it was, don't tell yourself the good news, and then say, okay, where do you want to go with that? And that's what we did.
Thank you. So I'd love to invite anybody in the Stoa to, if you have a question for Barry, feel free to pop it into the chat, and I can call on you. And I guess while we wait for more questions to come up, I think just to create a bit more of diversity of conversation here. Oh, I'm seeing some. Joanne's got a question, but I don't see what it is, Joanne. I know, Joanne. So Joanne, why don't you read your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rumbling because I don't have it coherently. I wish I had. So I recently read a fascinating book called The Empire of Pain. So this is about the Sackler family, the founder of Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which made OxyContin famous, eventually caused the opioid crisis. So I worked in the US Department of Veterans Affairs for almost 3 years in one of their healthcare transformation work. So one of the areas that I worked with was pain management with opioid therapy. So dive into a lot of mental health, suicide prevention. It was an extremely humbling experience, but I've seen power in large organizations playing out, especially this book was published, I think this year in the spring. The Sackler family knew along the way about their drug is addictive, but advertised as not addictive. And knowing that the drug is killing people, but they were, I think, agreed not to describe it. It's not about not knowing, but they're so powerful, so big that and they're surrounded by yes people. And I've seen that in different organizations where when you become so powerful, the upper management, people stop saying no. They will say no to you only in a superficial performance kind of way. Power struggle seems to be so innate within us, even family relationships, parents and children. I have a adult daughter, so I know it's really not about logic and reason. It's almost like, oh, you don't listen to me, you don't respect me, then I lose my power, and then everything falls apart. Can you comment on how power becomes much worse when you become too big to fail?
Yes, it gets worse when you become too big to fail. I mean, they had a lot of investment, and it got clear when one saw the size of the bill that they had to pay, how much money they had invested in this illegal operation. But you pointed to another side. They're not the only victims. The place is loaded with all those people who internal to the organization who knew about this and who did not act in a way to bring it down. It is a collusion that goes on around this, and of course we see that in the same ways. That there's fear at both ends. There's fear. You're in that. You're making a nice living there. It's the opportunity you always had. You're either a scientist who's working on stuff, or you're a marketing person, or you're making good money through the sales, and the better the farmer does, the better it is for me. And so you don't want to risk that. And so, for some uncertain outcome, I mean, it's just to be clear, it is not that they were evil in their own alone. It often takes, doesn't it, take collusion to those who also have the information about this. And in a sense, in a lab, that's what we're trying to do. We would hope if somebody goes through the lab. I'll give you a small example of something, because I don't know, much more than I've said about the pharma thing. I mean, as far as I know, that's it. But a small parallel to it is, in the lab, I just remember this very clearly. I got a call after the lab, and it was from an HR person at an organization where somebody had just come back from the lab. And because the person knew me, the HR person called me, said it was important. They wanted me to know that this guy is in a lot of pain. He's in a lot of pain. And I felt bad about that. He's in a lot of pain. Anyways, so then I spoke with him. And he said, I'm not in any pain at all. He says, but I'm starting to cause some pain here. And this was the point. The lab, in some sense, in that bottom place, had really made him much more aware of the collusion he plays in the organization. And he then stepped up to it and started to push back around it, which at the top was experienced as he's in pain, and he wasn't in pain. He was really, repeated, but he was starting to cause some pain around things that felt needed to have some pain. So, that's where it is. I am much more interested in working with the top in that situation, as well as with the bottom. What is it that allows us to this condition to perpetuate? Yes.
Thank you so much.
I'm really enjoying Peter Jones' question. Peter, would you like to share?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Barry. You've got a really interesting group of people in the room with you here today, so appreciate the chance to ask. I wanted to ask about institutional power, or organizations writ large, and kind of the social influence. And so the question is that we're kind of clearly at a point in history where your ideas are clearly coming forth into society, and we can see an intense demonization of others that are almost manufactured with media collusion, and that are created to create kind of attention by fighting each other, I guess. the little people can, draw their attention away from the power elite. But it's becoming recognizable that we're in some sort of peak phase. Where do we go from here? If we're at a peak power elite phase, if that's how I might say it, I mean, we see obvious power dynamics, the public's compliance or the rejection of, and it's not just elected officials, but we're seeing, with kind of either the idealization of people like Dr. Fauci, a bureaucrat essentially, or the demonization of bureaucrats as a power struggle with respect to kind of the roles of elites in society. So what happens next after this level of struggle and from your observation of power failures? Is this a cycle? This can't go on forever.
Yeah. Right, it can't go on forever. So it's going to go it's going to go some way. I don't think I have a lot of this. Let me tell you when I think about it myself, because obviously I'm experiencing the same thing you're thinking. And again, my sense is it doesn't come in interaction across these lines, which we think that's where it would come, but it isn't. And my mind tracks off to so many different places. I'm afraid of this, but there was a thing in the New York Times recently, like yesterday maybe, reporting where some psychologists had done some work, and based on the notion that if the two sides experienced one another's points of view, like now we don't, we tend to be in our own, then that would change things. And so what they did is, and I can't give you the exactly detail. Anyways, what do I know about this in case you want to look at it? If you haven't seen it already, I will have it before it's gone. It was yesterday's Times. Well, anyways, they paid people on both sides of the issue a certain amount if for a certain period of time, they would simply read information that came from the other side and not their own. And of course, the hope was that they would understand more the other side. But the results were just the opposite. What they found is the conservative people, by reading the liberal side, became much more conservative. It aggravated them more. And even the liberals became more liberal, not quite as extreme, but doesn't matter. That in other words, they became more separate from one another on the basis of that. Now, okay, so it's often the case that I think we underestimate, that we always tend to look at the interaction across, that's where the breakthrough comes, or in hierarchical systems, the breakthrough comes. And I've been just fascinated by the internal issues that go on within each of those places. And that would be even here, the internal issues that go on within the conservative group. And then, and so my fantasy is the breakthrough comes from internally. Like if it's on the conservative side, where somebody comes on and says, this is all a hoax. I mean, the guy lost the election. What are we doing to this? Or something on the liberal side that opens up around that. And then it's the internal issue that has the internal interaction that has the possibility of breaking the glue inside. And you may have found that in other kinds of consulting or similar interactions inside. That is because one thing I know, you have such big questions and I have such small answers, small situations. But let me give you a story, okay, what this means to me. We were doing one of our workshops, not the Power Lab, but it was even the smallest of organization workshops at some conference. And so all we could do was we're in a big room and how we're going to do something top, middle, bottom customer interaction. Anyways, we did something. And then when it was over, which I like to do, I then gave some input around what are the dynamics in each of those places. Okay. And usually, so again, what you're trying to do is to elevate it so people can begin to see their experience, not as something specific to us, but it's something that universal that happens regularly to people in these top, middle, bottom places. That's what we're trying to do. Anyways, in the bottom place, when I was talking about the bottom world, I said, and one of the things that happens in that bottom world is there is incredible tension to maintain uniformity. And when there are differences tend to be suppressed, not only externally by others, but internally suppressed. I sit on it. And that even that sometimes, because my membership in the group means more to me than telling the truth or expressing my difference or going my way. Anyways, up pops a hand from the bottom group and a guy says, no, that wasn't true for us. We were all in this uniformly together. And then another hand goes up and says, no, that's not true. I didn't agree, but I didn't say anything. And so, that's one of those moments, even telling it to you now, you see, it sends a chill down my back, which says, that's what theory predicts, that there will always be that tension and that pressures towards uniformity. And the worst of them is self-imposed. So that's what I think has got to be going. That's my hope, that that's what's going on in these camps, that there is some self-imposed going along. I mean, there are, because I'm fed all this kind of stuff. I see the guy who goes around with his camera to the Trump rallies, and and he asks people questions which clearly just would embarrass them if they were paying attention. And it says, well, they seem to have drunk the Kool-Aid. There's just no way to break through there. And maybe that's true, but that's not true of everybody. That's what my theory says. I just know that tension exists in all the camps, and that exists even as a liberal who then takes a liberal position, but then also sees the weakness of that position or the other side, and has hesitance in speaking that, because in that culture, speaking that leads to what? Cancellation. You're gone. So that's the kind of issue that's operating in both camps. And anyways, so that's the best I can do around that. Is my hope for the future, that rather than civil war, which is the other possibility, that some people in states are actually talking about wanting to secede from the Union. In Maryland, they want to secede from the Union. You don't want to see that. Anyhow. Thanks.
So Barry, I might pick the next question about observation. I'm seeing one with Parag Desai.
Here it is.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to know, you talked about observing and observation earlier. I wanted to know, as an anthropologist, how that observation and taking notes of your surroundings affected your social life. Did you start to develop some kind of idiosyncrasy when it came to taking notes?
Yeah. So I hope so, but I'm not so sure. I mean, my wife Karen has been a partner for me for many years, and many times she's the one who turns around and says to me, you're acting middle around this, and so it just, the ability to be the anthropologist of your own behavior, it has really affected. But if you're talking about my own, it's not just seeing myself in these various places. I mean, I thought it was very interesting for me in the sense of coming to this session, because I said to Naryan, I said, you know what, I don't want to do a presentation. I did presentations all my life. I do not want to. They run the risk of being very boring and over theoretical, and they could be interesting, but you can't count it. And besides, I would have to work too hard to do it. So I don't want to do it. Why don't I just come in and I'll rely on people's curiosity? And I heard that people's curiosity will stimulate, dialogue of some sort that we can get at. Well, that's a shift from how I'm going to be taught around this, which is, I am not going to suck up all responsibility for the success of this time that we have together here. So anyways, wait. So wait a minute, let me get back with the question. So Parag, so anyways, the question is, it's not that I take notes, which is not a bad idea, although Karen and I do create our history, but that's just our history. So we have, I don't know, going back maybe 15 years, little documents about histories, not just every day by day, because we're not, that good about it. But the interesting thing about our histories is that's only our picture. So we do not have the picture of what's going on around us, of how other people are responding to the same worlds we're in. But it does make you, and I hear this from other people as well, the lab would be nothing if it didn't have carryover to how people experience themselves and what was going on in the real world. If they didn't see the link between what was happening in their little three-class society to what's going on in the poverty sections, in the very well-to-do sections, and what does it mean to be middle class? What does that mean to be middle class? How does that relate? Anyways, that's the answer to that. But it takes me to another place, and that is middle. Even now, there are some people in the field who say, "Oh yeah, he did all the stuff about middle power," and I feel bad about that because I think I don't have anything more to say about middle power than I do about bottom power or top power or customer power or whatever. But it did start with middle. And when I just told you the experience by the guy raising his hand saying, "No, I disagree with you," and those moments chill you. Well, to take a little historical story here, well before Seeing Systems was like a late bloomer, even though it's I don't know, 20 years or so, I don't know what it is. I had written a bunch of little pamphlets about things. And one of them was called In the Middle. Now, there is such a thing around now, but that is a compilation of a number of things within the middle, but there was this In the Middle. And eventually what I tried to do was, again, based solely on the Power Lab, to describe what do we mean by a middle condition. It's nothing personal, it's a space. It's a space that people enter. And once you enter into that space, it's a space in which you are torn between two or more individuals or groups who are pulling you in different directions. That's the middle space. So in the paper, I simply describe what life is like for people in the middle, what's the experience they have, how do other people see people in that middle place, and what might middle power be. Okay, totally Power Lab. Then I get a call from a fellow in the Harvard Business School. He says, "Well, listen, there's a conference coming up. I'd like you to talk about middle power at the conference." Now you have to understand this. So this is the people who are out in the field, not me. They're working with organizational change, difficult projects. And when they bring a speaker in, they're looking for somebody who gives them some insights and some actions that they can undertake. Well, again, I'm feeling very small. I'm saying, what have I got that's going to be of any value to these people? Well, that was the big thing. He said, "Well, let's go in and talk about middle space and what the experience is and how people are viewed and all of that." So that's what I did. And I simply did that presentation. And it blew people's minds. Because again, it was one of those things that gave you a chance to see, this is not about me. This is not about our unique situation. This is a pattern that happens with great regularity to people in this position. Now, that shift from the particular and personal to the general says that therefore there's a different set of leverages for how we do this, that maybe the goal isn't to fix me, which is what they often feel. So you have people in that middle place who would feel, I used to be smart, I used to be intelligent, I used to know what I was doing, but somehow or another, I'm confused, I feel weak, nobody likes me anymore, I'm never satisfying anybody enough. This one, I don't let this one down, I let this one down. And I'm starting to worry if there's something wrong with me. Now, I am telling you, in that room, how many middles were feeling that? And then suddenly this guy comes in and says, let me describe what this middle place. I don't know your life. I never interviewed you. I never talked to you. I don't know your organization. See if this isn't what's going on. No. Anyways, I think that was not even in response to a question. That was in response to that it spun off, but it somehow got to me anyways. But I think if we didn't look at that, that is one of the huge shifts that we're just trying to create. It sounds very simple, but getting that notion that when stuff happens to us, it is so hard to get a sense that this is maybe not just me, and maybe not just us, and maybe not this situation, but what's the larger picture, and what does that do for us?
Thank you.
Question. Steve, gotcha.
And Barry, I have to admit, I mentioned that I did about 4 hours of facilitation this morning, and I have read your books.
Okay.
Hearing you describe middle power again, I felt like I was getting insights from that. I wanted to take some notes and be like, oh yeah, this is how I might language some things. Oh yeah, I forgot about how powerful this type of thing is. So that's cool.
I know, but the issue is real. So I forget too. See, because no, really, we do. That is the problem. The problem is, how do we stay in touch, whether it's with one another, whether we get good coaching from one another, because it is so easy. You know, as you say, what are we born with? We're born with that reflexive response. And the other thing about us as human beings is we have the possibility of awareness, but it doesn't come easily. It doesn't come easily. And anyways, I'm glad to hear it. Makes this time worthwhile for me just to know that's happening to you, Naryan. So rise up again and take another look at it. That's very important.
And I want to invite David to share your question in terms of also bringing it to the present moment.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now, who are you looking to?
You, I guess.
You're talking to me. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So
yeah. I think it's yeah. So it's something like earlier you said something like this is as far as Oshry goes with regard to the paper that you published, and insofar as I feel very much your work as super core to my understanding of the world and the nature of leverage itself, as you had just talked about it, for instance. I'm very curious to hear a bit about how you understand yourself making a comment like that. And insofar as, like you said, it's not about the unique situations. The larger pattern unfolding includes a me that's somewhere in kind of the quote unquote younger generation and you in a quote unquote older generation. And as you make a comment towards the ending phase of your life, and you make a comment like, this is as far as Oshry goes, how do you feel making a statement like that? And how do you understand the rest of your life in relation to that? And I, in part, because I feel so much like you are a part of my lineage of wisdom, that this means a lot to me to have the opportunity to inquire. And at least partially, I'd love to give at least a nod insofar as there's a question from Susan Campbell as well, that, you know, there's this you guys are part of who I think sets the path that people like me are able to walk on. And so hearing how you guys want to end your path is really, or the continuation of it after you're gone, is something that matters a lot to me.
Yeah. Okay. And certainly then, so I think a lot of us have different ways with regard to that. And so I don't want to give any sense that how I'm handling what I call not the end of the theory, but the end of my piece of it can be very different from, you know, for other people and whatever journey or however you call it they're on versus I'm on. So what I meant by that was that not even so much seeing systems, but when I wrote the organic systems framework is a small pamphlet. And And so my sense was, there was, I listened to YouTube music regularly, classical music, and there was this whole thing, at Mozart, whole section on it. And then I happened to scroll down, and I like to see what people's comments are. And so somebody said, and this sticks with me, he said, you know, Mozart, this is a hard thing for me to say, but he says, Beethoven writes great music, there's no question, powerful music. But sometimes when you're listening to Mozart, it feels like he didn't write it, like it was out there in the world, and he found it and put it down. So it was beyond him. It was something that he grasped, something in the universe. And then I've heard lesser artists say the same thing. One singer said, and I heard this tune in my head, it was out there, and I knew I had to write this before somebody else did. The notion that whatever was in there, that arrangement of notes or the thought around it existed, and you grab it. But so here's what I'm saying, and I think I have said it elsewhere too, and it's, you know, for a little guy who sees himself small, it's a hard thing to say, but that's how I feel about the organic systems framework. It wasn't that I created it, it was that I found it, that I found a certain truth about human interaction. Now, there are lots of truths, but this is a truth that I found. And what I like about it is it captures a lot of things about me, in the sense that it's a beautiful theory. Now, when I say that beautiful, it's because it's, in the sense, it's aesthetic. And you know, Naryan said before, earlier on that, you know, I had written plays. Well, aesthetics means a lot to me. And so that's a feature about it. And I think it's also a very practical theory. And so I just felt like I found this nature of what human systems were. Now, in that sense, I don't have any more there. What I don't have, that's, you know, that's as far as I got. and it fits in terms of patterns of relationship, patterns of process, whatever it is. Someday if it's a little harder to find that pamphlet, but it doesn't mean that people can't do a lot of work with that beyond me. How does that, if you have that framework, that way of seeing human systems, there's all kinds of things. Now, just another example is I talk about top, bottom, end, middle, end, provider-customer relationships as patterns of relationships that exist all over the place, not just organizationally, all over the place. Are there other such patterns of relationship that meet the same criteria? Maybe so. I haven't found them. You know, they're probably they're out there, and so that's all I mean. Now, how that means with the rest of my life, it's as if to say I'm done with that. Doesn't mean I'm done with life, but I'm done with that. I don't know if I said it here, or I said it earlier, that during COVID, I wrapped up some other writings. I got, you know, what is it called? Beneath the Veil? What Lies Beneath was an article published in the OD journal. And it was like, you know, okay, that's one place. So I keep saying the same thing to different audiences, but I don't go beyond that in terms of the theoretical framework. So there's the rest of life. I don't feel depressed about that. I feel very relaxed about it. There are undone things, you know, in life, things that I would, you know, things that I did. I'd like to have made a bigger impact in the world. I'd like to have more people who, you know, make that jump between what's specific and, you know, and what's systemic. To do that, what a huge factor would be if that was just not a matter for consultants or teachers or scientists or whatever, but it was a shift in consciousness. One thing that I wrote, the original title of which is called "While Waiting for Homo Systemicus," you know, which simply means somewhere along the line, would there be an evolution where Homo systemicus naturally saw systems? We don't have it, you know, we don't. So but we do have the ability to observe and to choose. We have that, which is not a small gift. You know, a lot of, you know, wish we'd sold a few more books. I wish the Power Lab was still alive. That's hard to, you know, to resuscitate something once it's gone. So there are a lot of, you know, hanging items. I don't know how many of you have seen one of the more recent things is called Encounters with the Other. Anybody seen that? Yeah, I see a head, but you know, that to me is a very important piece, which I do my best to understand how we get into these problems with the other, and what is the potential breakthrough around that. You know, we've tried a lot of things about, you know, getting that. We have a lot of fans about it, but how do you get it thinking into schools and you know, into the general public? So there are a number of undone things, but anyways, but the theory in my end, I'm done with it. It's not a negative thing to say. It's not at all a negative thing to say. I'm very proud of it. I'm very pleased with it, and I think it's a powerful item.
I think that feels like a really beautiful place to leave this conversation. I saw so many other good questions and some conversation in the chat as well. I wish we could have had the time to weave it all in. Ah, but Barry, it feels so rich to hear you describe your work this way, and just to see all of these faces, all of the people that came to hear this and witness this conversation.
Right. I
see
hope
lots of smiles.
Yeah. I just feel bad if somebody had a question burning, you know, but you know, I have my email on this, right? So if anybody wants to send me something, certainly I'll do my best to get back to you. I do have time.
That's wonderful. So huge thank you for joining us here. I don't know how to plug anything specific at the Stoa, but for all of us here, I really recommend going to thestoa.ca. There's a whole host of events. Too many, they overwhelm me when I look at it. I know Robert Gilman is doing a 4-part series, so that's going to be really exciting. I see Peter still putting in the chat there, so Peter, if you want to plug anything specific, feel free as well. And Peter does some amazing journaling about what goes on here and about how, I think, how this, the conversations here, how they affect him, and sort of he channels that. And it's really good reading as well. So with that being said, I wish you all a wonderful evening or afternoon or wherever you are in your world, whatever time of day it is. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.